Today on the Student Slant, we talk to advisor from the Lantern, Spencer Hunt.
So I'd been a reporter most of my life, right? And I was at the Columbus Dispatch, had been there really in my 10th year. And, my role at the Dispatch was environment reporter. And so that's what I did. I was looking around, after 10 years, you think, what else is there that I can do? There was, with the industry being the way it is, there's a lot of contraction, there's a lot of disruption. Newspapers are losing money. So not a lot of people are leaving or moving. Some people who do leave came back, right? So I decided to take a job offer with an ex-colleague with a company called Mindset Digital, where we did a lot of stuff with social media. And did that for about a year, and really it didn't sit well with me. I was looking for a role back with journalism after being a reporter for so long. The opportunity came here at Ohio State to be a teacher and the advisor for the student newspaper and television station, and so I took that, and that was about 3 years ago, and I really like it here. My name is Spencer Hunt, and I'm the advisor for the Lantern.
I'm Zach Varda.
I'm Jake Ray, and this is the Student Slant. So, Spencer, what is it like, going from being a reporter yourself to then running your own student paper?
That's a big shift.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things to learn about, right? So if you're a reporter, you're just, basically a contributor to a much larger organization. So when you make the switch to not only being a teacher, which is something that I had not done before, but then also moving into a role that has a lot of business functions in addition to oversight and editing functions, not just news, but then also arts and life and how we handle an entire sports team. Throw into that a television operation, Lantern TV. So yeah, there's a big learning curve.
Would you say that it's been a smooth transition, or do you think that with all that to learn, it's been sort of tough?
Nothing's smooth in anything involving news. Every day is completely different. What I can say is that from the very beginning when we started, not only did we come into a place where we changed the days in which the newspaper published, we changed the size of the newspaper, the layout of the paper. We were constantly looking to change everything that we were doing right there. So, and then we changed our front end system for how we take in, edit, and handle stories. So everything was pretty much completely different. What I can say from the first year to the second year to the third year is that we've continually improved in what I see as, most people would see it as a student newspaper, and that's what we are. But really what we are is this digital news organization centered around a website that's fed into by reaching out through all these social media channels. We're telling stories not only through text but through video, and then we also publish a newspaper twice a week. So from the beginning to the third year, nothing's smooth at all. But it's been great to see how this organization has evolved and gotten better.
So when editors or reporters are chasing like a big story or something that takes a lot of work, how do you as a former reporter balance guiding them down the right path versus letting them figure it out for themselves?
Well, there's all sorts of things that go into that, right? And so a lot depends on what the story is. If it's a breaking news situation, we, like say the November 28th attacks, we had just set up that year a process that we were going to do, how we were going to handle an event like that, and then it happened, but how we were going to handle an event like that in terms of what we do through social media, how we get things out online, and then as we're going, how we're then producing these stories, more finished stories, and then getting to a finished printed product if it's a print day. All those things happen on November 28th. So that's all a lot of coordination and meeting beforehand and talking with people and then working with people as things are going on. Okay, so that's breaking news. There are other situations that we're involved with where you're doing daily stories, and in many cases the students have never dealt with any of these things before. And so there's all sorts of demands that come in with each individual story. So if there's a story that involves the court system, how do I navigate, clerk of courts to get the records that I need from either a state court or a county court? Police, who do I call? How do I work through? What does this form mean? This report mean? Those kinds of things. Coroner reports, all sorts of different issues and subjects. And then things get a little bit more, I don't know, for lack of a word, get a little bit more complicated after that when you're dealing with subjects like political subjects that people have never dealt with before, long-running issues in Ohio that you're just coming into as a reporter for the first time, but yet there's all this background and context that goes along with it. And then after that, we have what you would call, the project length investigative stories. And I meet every week with our project reporters to discuss with them how they're progressing towards a path where at the end of the semester we're producing some of the Lantern's best work. So there's all sorts of different things that go into just about every story. What I do is I'm available to give advice and direction on any one of these things, in a large part through the fact that I've been a reporter for over 20 years and I've encountered a lot of these things myself. And if I don't know, then I have some tools to kind of help people figure out what it is they need to know too.
Do you feel like as a journalism instructor, it may be more of a trade type skill, whereas since you were a reporter yourself, passing on the knowledge that you learned on the job is more like a trade skill and less like a traditional teacher being at the front of the classroom and lecturing?
Sure. Journalism is equal parts profession and trade, right? So when we're talking about how we approach, report, write, and edit stories, these are all skills that you develop. A lot of people think of writing as an art, and in many ways it is. But what we're teaching here is largely a discipline of the kinds of decisions you need to make and the questions that you need to ask in the shortest order possible to get the information that you need, and then to be able to turn around and organize that information into a story that anyone can grasp. That's really a skill and a discipline, and the only way that you can do that, largely, is to practice it. And so one of the things I like about this program here at Ohio State is that the student newspaper is part of that program. So if you're writing a story in a class, you're not just writing for that class, you're also writing for the newspaper. And then you have that experience of thousands of people potentially picking up that story either online or in print and then reading what it is that you had to say. And then you get feedback from those people, right? And so that's really informative too. So I think, does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I guess kind of from a very broad view, what are some of the common roadblocks or stumbling blocks you see for student journalists who are just kind of getting their feet wet for the first time, things that you just commonly see them messing up that maybe a more veteran reporter wouldn't?
It's the same things that I would be dealing with when I was a student reporter too. It's largely a lot of the things we talked about before, right? So if it's a trade, if it's something that you need to practice, you got to start somewhere. And so just the simple act of going into a situation and recognizing, well, what's most important and significant in this story that makes it the lead? How then do I craft the rest of the context that needs to come right after that in that story? How do I build that story out? So writing a story is a fundamental obstacle that many people struggle with early on. You got to get that discipline down. And on the flip side, it's also taking on this role that you've never had before, where you're a reporter, and being a reporter is really cool, right? But it also involves you going out, talking to people you've never talked to before. As a reporter, you could be kind of intimidating to them, right? But it's also kind of intimidating to yourself personally because you're then going up to complete strangers and asking them questions that you probably never would have unless you were a reporter. So it's getting used to all of those things, at the same time.
So being the practicum instructor, you had to deal with every single person's beat. And when you were a reporter, you just had one beat. So was there anything you had to, learn as a instructor that you might not have known as a reporter that you could help a student report on better?
Sports reporting is a learning curve in terms of the kinds of conventions in writing. It's a little bit different. Well, actually, it's quite a bit different in many ways than it is, say, writing news, right? So there's a bit of a learning curve there. However, fundamentally speaking, the things that you need to do to write any story are the same across almost any kinds of beats or discipline. And so what's most important, what do we need to know, and how do we write that the most effective way possible, right? That's what we're working through. And so if I'm on a beat that's a little bit more specialized and I've never dealt with it before, and I'm seeing a term or some sort of jargon or an acronym that I'm not familiar with, then that makes me just as qualified to ask the question about what that really is and demand answers and get that story improved, right? So a lot of this stuff crosses all sorts of boundaries.
So the news industry, as we see, is like changing every day almost, it seems. What do you see, I guess, as the future for the Lantern? I think obviously we've done a lot to adapt to it already, but where are we going, years from now, in the next year or two?
It's hard to look even a couple of years down the road, but one of the things that I can say is I think the future of journalism is bright for the people who are coming through this program now, right? So all of journalism is basically going through, print, broadcast, radio, television. They're all going through a tremendous amount of disruption because of what we're facing in terms of how we present news. So on the internet, all of this stuff is becoming the same thing. So our reporters here, right, they don't just write a standard story. Then we're also looking at getting photos and video to go along with that. So these are all skills that we're teaching all in the same place, right? And so all of these skills are important to have to then be able to move out and be marketable in the future. The newspaper itself, I think, all newspapers really face a huge problem, and it comes down to money. So the amount of advertising dollars that newspapers had in 2000, right, when advertising revenues were at their highest, I mean, newspapers have lost 2/3 of the amount of money they used to make, roughly speaking. You're getting some money back from digital advertising, and that's where growth is, right? But for every dollar that you gain in digital advertising, you've lost about $13 in print advertising. And the problem is you're kind of caught in this vice right now where the most money that you can make actually comes from this printed product that fewer and fewer people are wanting to pick up and read because they're looking at it online. And so the transition point will come when the amount of money that you can make online roughly equals the amount of money that you need to spend minus your printing costs. But so like you have to have this distribution network, you have to have this press, you have to get all that stuff out there because that's the main source of money through your ads, right? And so once the digital advertising revenue gets up to a point where you can lose the print operation and then still be able to pay your people that are talented and really good and reach this audience that's paying for it all through online, you're going to see a lot of these newspapers, I think, falling off. For the Lantern, and I'm not saying that the whole organization falling off, I'm just saying the printed product. For the Lantern, being a student-run organization, it's a lot easier for us, I think, to make changes, okay, and to adapt to this and find new ways to bring in advertising. So this is the business side of the things that I was talking about. So the Lantern's future, I think, is actually right now is pretty stable, and we have a lot more opportunities, I think, to adapt to change because we're so small and I would say nimble, right? So every year we're changing, kind of the basic structure of what it is that we're doing, how we respond and reach out to people online. We've been growing our online readership by about 40% a year. This year we're doing a lot more with how search engines can find the Lantern. Also with our social media efforts to reach out and invite people to come to the Lantern, we're doing a lot better with that. And so on an average news day this year, we're getting about 40% more readership than an average news day last year. And then that year we also had a large increase over the amount of online readership we had the year before. The deal is still, for us, the same thing. How do we make all of this increased traffic online bring in more money so that the Lantern can continue to support itself and provide that mission, that educational mission for our students?
So, for lack of a better term, the Lantern's not a real paper. It's a student paper.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about how the Lantern prepares, a student journalist when they leave Ohio State, that they're ready to go and work at their first small market, or that you feel like when they leave here that they're ready to go and like be an asset at a paper?
Well, so what the Lantern does and what the strength of the journalism program does is you get these, you're able to write stories in a paper, student paper, that other people are going to read. And that provides what in the old term used to be clips. The clips are useful for showing professional news organizations how good you would be as an intern. And so what I like to tell people, and what I frankly tell people, is that what a student newspaper shows is not something that competes with a professional newspaper, but it shows potential, right? And so the thing that you bring out of the college newspaper experience to employers is that kind of raw potential that they can use to compare to other student journalists from other schools and weigh in terms of, well, who can we bring in mostly as interns, right? So people that have only student newspaper experience are not likely, I think, to get a really good, solid, well-paying job in the industry, but they can show how well they would stack up as interns, and then those internships, right, that creates that next step of experience that you really need to have in your background to then go and be able to compete for the jobs that are available out there at newspapers, right? Maybe smaller market ones, maybe mid-market ones, but the relationships that you build professionally with people in real-life newsroom settings are also extremely valuable as references. And so the student newspaper, is basically the place where you show potentially how good you could be.
So you were our instructor this last semester.
Yes.
And we only had about 20 students, and that's a lot lower than we normally have for practicum reporters that help just get articles and bring articles in for the paper.
Mm-hmm. We have on average about 27 students. Next semester we've got, I think, 33.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you feel with fewer students we handled covering the news at Ohio State?
Well, I thought the newspaper did really well this semester. There were some big issues that were covered, big announcements on campus, like free tuition for Pell students, the iPads that are coming, for free for freshmen next year. There was also some big coverage of crime events on campus. There was a lot of insight I thought that the students had, especially with the students did a good job with covering the was it suspension or shutdown? Suspension of fraternity activities on campus. And so, the editors will be able to pick up and do a lot of things that that the reporters are still learning on. I thought they did a good job. I don't think that the class that we had this semester was actually that small, right? We had 20 students. It's a little bit smaller than we normally would, but if anything, I think the amount of news that was produced is the same.
Thank you for joining us for a great discussion. Come back next week for more student perspective on the Student Slant.